Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to our Success Thursday, this week with Thomas van Zuijlen. Sorry, I almost mispronounced your name there.
But corrected midway, it's super nice. Thank you for having me, Vasco.
Absolutely. So Thomas, Thursdays is Success Day here on the podcast, but before we jump into that, do share with us, what's your favorite retrospective format and why?
I like retros where I add a meta level for people. It's also a disappointing answer, I'm sure, because many people probably say, I don't have a favorite. I vary my retros all the time based on what I think is going on in the team. But what I do that I really like, that I want to give as a tip for others is two things: to explicitly set the expectations for the flow of the session and to set the stage for a measurable outcome ahead of time. And the flow I make with a little, let's say, double diamond of diverging and converging on topics. First, what do we need to do? And then, okay, if we picked a thing, what can we do about it? And then setting the stage for a measurable outcome the next time means just providing a, let's say, user story style outcome template to help people get a bit further than just, okay, we want better Wi-Fi next week or something like that. Okay, and how will we know that the Wi-Fi, you know the example. But those two things. So setting the stage adds value to any sort of retro, so that at any time you understand, okay, this is where we're at the conversation, and it's going to lead to the next thing.
So how concrete do you go in the steps when you set the expectations for the flow of the retro?
It depends a little bit on the level of let's say, conversational maturity for the team. So if there's a team that's really new to having retrospective conversations that lead to something, let's put it that way, I would sometimes number these steps. And I would do that on like a flip chart if you're in a physical space, or in a Miro board, or when you're online, or at least a shared workspace where I illustrate, okay, we're going to go from here to there. It's like almost a roadmap. I number those steps, and then they correspond to the things that we do, the activities, the sailboat that you're illustrating with whatever drives you forward, that sort of stuff. So that people can see where that is. And once people are more comfortable with having that sort of conversation and more comfortable with someone who facilitates that in that way, I let go of the explicitness of that, and I just keep the illustration of the double diamond. And then the control is a little bit more in their own hands. I mean, the control is for sure there, but they don't need to be reminded that it's not enough to just talk about complaints. They also need to do something with them.
Absolutely. And what have you learned about setting the stage for measurable outcomes? What are maybe some of the questions, some of the tips you use in order to get the team to focus? Okay, what's the measurable part in this that we are aiming to do?
That is really good. That's usually the toughest thing, because it requires some, let's say, mental gymnastics for connecting something that you don't like or that you want to have more of, conversely, to something that you can measure. I try to always make it as small as possible. So I ask teams a couple of times, can it be smaller? Or what needs to be true before this outcome that you think of? Because often we think like 3 or 4 steps ahead, or the outcome that we want is actually kind of complex, especially given your all the different variables in place, right? And it helps if you make it even smaller. So ask them to make it smaller. And then if you're using these steps for defining the problem, then defining something you want to see instead, and then defining an action throughout the retrospective, you can just use those separate outcomes and line them up, if you know what I mean. So the first part of your conversation leads to X, and then Y, and then Z, and those should align with each other. So you can read them up or down, from the problem to the solution that you have, and the solution back up. And for that, it's something really simple to measure: the amount of. So if it can be quantified, then you can measure it. And if it's something that's subjective, then you can always turn it into something quantifiable by asking people for feedback on a let's say, a 3-point scale or something.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because very often we handle things that are not so easy to measure, like, for example, the level of anxiety in the team from stakeholder pressure, as an example, right? Like, it's very hard to kind of put a number on someone's anxiety. But a very simple thing we can do, as you just illustrated, is we can ask their level of anxiety on a scale, right? And we can compare the level of anxiety in the previous iteration with the one in the next iteration. And some things just need to be measured over several iterations because they might require some new relationship building or some conversations that need to happen, whatever that might be. And that's something that I think also helps make the measurability part of the outcomes more, at the same time, more tangible, because we're talking about numbers, although we're asking different people how they feel, but we're talking about numbers. So it's more concrete. We're looking at, a 5 is different than a 10, no matter how you look at it, right? So if you went from a 5 to a 10 in terms of the level of anxiety, it's either very good or very bad, depending on what 10 means in that context, right? So,
yes.
And the other thing is, once we put that kind of concreteness in what is, in any case, a subjective or qualitative metric, we can start conversations, right? Like, we went from a 5 to a 6. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Like, it's the same, right? But if we go from a 1 to a 10, you go like, whoa, what happened, right?
Yeah.
What triggered this different perspective?
Yeah, it's super good that you say this. I agree with it, and I try to make it even simpler for people because as with making estimations, also a fun topic but different. What does that number in particular mean? So I try to get teams to also look at trends of change rather than single data points. And if I want to know their level of something, I try to ask them or get them to talk about, is it more than the last time or less than the last time or something? That already can help, and it maybe lowers the threshold into transforming a feeling into a number. Because as you say, like a 5 or a 6, what's the big difference? But So try to lower that threshold for people a little bit, and try to help them understand that it's trends that matter more.
Absolutely. So, of course, we look at these trends and we host the retrospectives because we want to help our team succeed and our organization succeed. But we also need to understand what that means for us as Scrum Masters. So, Thomas, what's your definition of success for yourself as a Scrum Master?
I used to think that success was when everyone likes me, or when people were having fun during the sprint review or something like that. That melted away like snow in hot sun during the first couple of months of my Scrum Mastership. But by now, I think I measure it in terms of the amount of disruption I've caused in business as usual, quote unquote, for key individuals that are either too involved or not involved enough with the Scrum team. So I want to see angry emails, for instance. That happens a lot. I mean, that sounds weird. Like, do people really do that? Yes, they do. So that sort of stuff hurts me, because oftentimes my role is conflated with my person, by people that I work with, because like I put everything I have into that work. So that's also what you then get back. And then people have complaints about the way of working that's suddenly so different. And that's only because now there's a Scrum Master that actually sort of adheres, so that honors the immutability principle of Scrum, for instance, that sort of stuff. And I've learned to look for indicators of discontent, and I judge them differently. So that's why I say key individuals that are either too involved or not involved enough, or had been not involved enough with the Scrum team, if they sort of speak up then and complain, then I know that at least I'm having an impact. It's also hard to measure, right? But then at least I know that there's something shifting.
Yeah, absolutely. So you did say about the angry emails. The way I describe it usually is emails with emotion. Sometimes they are angry, sometimes they are frustrated, sometimes they are joyful as well, right? We Scrum Masters also get joyful emails from people who are either too much or too little involved with the team, right? Yes. Sometimes the CEO will come after a review and say, "Oh my God, I didn't think this was that this was possible. What happened? How did you change? What happened to the team?" And sometimes the CEO comes and says, what the hell happened? This is exactly the same thing that we saw before. I expected to see more. And then, of course, we need to reply and say, did you notice that everybody was waiting for an answer from you?
Yes, well said. Yeah, exactly. That sort of stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
emotions are a key indicator for us, positive or negative, of course.
yeah, absolutely. For me, it's also difficult because I also am a person, as many Scrum Masters are a person. But that means that I also have my own emotions, and sometimes it's difficult to use them in the right way, or to make sure that I don't use them too much, because I wear my heart on my sleeve, and sometimes I get feedback about that as well. And it helps if you can look at what's going on from a little bit of a distance, as you know, right? So as a Scrum Master, you have a little bit of distance from the smell of the room, so to speak, and it becomes difficult if your own emotions come into play. So it's more helpful to be a mirror in that sense.
Yeah.
But that's let's say a journey for me.
It's totally a journey, and if there's one tip I can give you and our listeners out there, is that it's very hard to be a coach if you're not being coached yourself. And one way to process the emotions is to process the emotions with a coach. Like, okay, so this is what I felt when this happened, and they help you to reflect and learn from that, rather than processing it straight with the people you're interacting with at work, because they have a horse in the race, as they say, right? They are invested in what comes out of that conversation, but the coach is there to help you, and he's not invested on what happens in the conversation. The coach is invested on your growth, right? On you getting, more insightful, perhaps more able to understand and react based on the emotions that you feel, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, super great tip. I'm nodding along, so you can't, when you're listening to this podcast, you won't be seeing that, but I've been nodding a lot to Vasco. But yeah, that's really that's really powerful. I write it down so that I try to, so that I can have a conversation with someone about it later on. But then at least it doesn't get lost in the big stream of what's going on during the day. So what did I feel after this call, or etc.
Absolutely, it's very important to listen to those emotions. Thomas, a great story. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for having me.
Part of a successful Scrum Master job is to help the product owner. Tomorrow we explore that critical role in Scrum, the product owner role. Tune in to learn about product owner anti-patterns, what you can do to help the product owner, and a real-life example of what a great product owner is and what made it so. Tomorrow on our Friday Product Owner episode. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.